Hello, good day. It's Aki Anastasiou here, and welcome to this very interesting series that we're going to be looking at the cloud. And I think the cloud is so relevant. Cloudy with a chance of VMware. My name is Aki Anastasiou, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you to this series. And our first chat is going to be with Jeff Jack, who's the principal practice lead for cloud at Dimension Data. We're also joined by Sumeeth Singh, who is the cloud provider manager for Sub-Saharan Africa at VMware. Gents, welcome. It's lovely to have you with us. A chance of VMware. Well, it's cloudy with a chance of VMware, and there's a high chance of VMware. Actually, I looked at the probabilities out there, but it's interesting to see where we are today. I think it's almost 2 years now that we've been into this pandemic, how our lives have changed. The predictions that we'll go back to some sort of normality haven't happened, but yet we've seen this massive digital adoption happening, companies accelerating what they were planning to do, in 3-4 years from now. And we've seen this massive digitization happening. What are you gents seeing in the cloud space? What are companies doing? How have the last 2 years been for you guys, or so? For the last 18 months, I should say.
So, can I use the word exciting? So it has been, and I don't mean to be flippant, because when we look at what it's done, and you spoke about the digital transformation accelerating, what the pandemic caused for many companies was an existential crisis, right? Created a burning platform where they had to do something, or else they faced the chance of not being around, of not surviving.
Was it a knee-jerk reaction, or was it a gentle reaction that we need to do something? Because that's, when you move to the cloud, a knee-jerk reaction is dangerous, hey, Jack?
Yeah, you're right. It is. When I say it's so some of it was a knee-jerk in terms of our clients landed up having to face some real challenges in terms of, for example, 30,000 people no longer came to the office and started working from home. Now they needed to serve those people. Now the knee-jerk was they still needed to run their business, and they needed to, service their clients. So, they had to move really, really quickly. So what we did find was clients were needing to make decisions rapidly, and they were needing to get their infrastructure in place in order to be able to operate in a way that they weren't used to operating in the past. Now, for many of them, cloud was the answer, and they'd already started something that had begun a bit of a journey, and they were able to accelerate that. For others, they were left wanting, where they hadn't really got any plans in place, and it became very difficult for them to be able to move. Yes, knee-jerk, but knee-jerk forced by very real circumstances.
Yeah, it's incredible. I remember talking to, I think it's still your chairman, Jeremy Ord, and early in the lockdown, and what he was saying is that what many companies experienced was what seemed impossible soon became possible, because guys like Dimension Data had the infrastructure to deploy those thousands of people to work remotely. Now, what have you been seeing, Sumeeth? What are the trends that you've been seeing over the last 18 to 2 years?
So I think it's what I've dubbed the COVID cloud catalyst. So I believe that cloud adoption was there. Many organizations, many entities were at some level of cloud adoption or cloud maturity.
Right.
COVID became that catalyst to get this fast-tracked and deployed in a fairly relatively short space of time. I mean, to Jeff's point, it was there may have been plans. This just became the real fast track to cloud adoption, and cloud lends itself to that ability to rapidly stand up infrastructure, rapidly have it scale up, scale down at will because of the nature of cloud adoption.
Right.
So I think that lends itself very quickly to the availability of cloud infrastructure back to businesses that needed to adapt very quickly.
Interesting. Jeff, we talked about that initial surge that happened at the beginning of the pandemic, and I guess it settled down. People adapted to the new way of remote working. What are customers saying to you now? What kind of demands do you have for cloud infrastructure at Dimension Data?
So it continues to grow, because what we have seen clients say to us is, we're not going back to where we were, right? The world has shifted, the world has moved, and we've moved with it. So we want to continue that journey. So it may not be as rapid as it was there was a bit of a burst, but it's now going to be far more sustained. And our clients are telling us, and what we're seeing is they want different ways of consuming. So they've understood that what they had done in the past is build big slabs of infrastructure themselves, which were very brittle and had some real constraints around it. What they want is flexibility. They wanting far more flexibility far more, infrastructure that provides them a better chance of business continuity and resilience.
Yes.
And for that, they want something that they can flex in. So the old models of buying and the old models of provisioning are being replaced by ones that are far more flexible. So that change has happened.
Why VMware?
Well, why VMware? Because VMware for us, for Dimension Data, is a long-standing partner. There's a lot of trust in the market. Most of our clients have VMware deployed in some shape, manner, and form. And for us to offer VMware-based services gives them the comfort of when they move onto our infrastructure, that it's something that they know that has the might of VMware behind it.
Yeah.
But the ability and the expertise of Dimension Data to run it, so they're getting the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and I guess VMware have been doing this for a long time, and they know how to do it, and they understand the cloud. I mean, I remember one of the first conferences I attended was a VMware conference, and they were talking about stuff that I didn't understand. It was like 2 decades ago. Now it's a completely different picture. But you guys have got that legacy to understand and how to adapt. And when I think about VMware, I think of agility, and I think of a very unique approach to cloud infrastructure.
So quite right, Aki. So I mean, VMware being the pioneers of virtualization, right? The first step of being able to consolidate and run multiple workloads on a single piece of infrastructure has now seen this journey into us being a true multi-cloud company. The partnerships that we have with some of the large hyperscalers bears testament to the fact that we are a multi-cloud company. And, we really evolved from server virtualization to really offering a multi-cloud strategy and a multi-cloud story. With that said, and to Jeff's earlier point, Dimension Data has become cloud verified, VMware cloud verified, which really signals to industry that they've built out global best practices and global standards.
Yeah.
So it gives customers the comfort that are already using VMware or are new to VMware, that Dimension Data is a trusted advisor in this space, as well as the fact that they've built to validated designs. So it really is a comfort in knowing that hosting with a Dimension Data or DD Cloud gives you the comfort of knowing that everything is secure and you can worry about business while Jeff worries about making sure your IT is running.
Yeah. No pressure on you, Jeff. No pressure.
Big shoes to fill.
But Jeff, it's certainly a very unique approach, right? And yet we are in a phase where cloud adoption is almost maturing. Yet there are so many organizations that are still making that migration, and yet you see so many people making so many mistakes on their journey to the cloud.
Yeah. I mean, if we look at, I suppose, where cloud is in the history of IT, it's really still in its infancy. If you just think about, I don't know, maybe the last 50, 60 years of where we come from as an IT industry.
Yeah.
And you look at cloud, it's probably been, 15 years really is what we're looking at. I mean, it's a blink of an eye, really. And so I still think there's a lot of maturity. And yes, people will make mistakes. As when you look at clients who adopted cloud very early on, where the technology itself, the approaches were very much bleeding edge and cutting edge, is others can learn from their mistakes. I think what is coming now is a far more mature approach to cloud.
Yeah.
Whereas I think in the beginning it was, if you're not in one of the hyperscalers, it's all over for you.
Yeah.
Whereas if we look at the approach today, people are saying it's hybrid.
Yes.
There is a role for the private cloud because there are a number of use cases which absolutely make sense for you. And there's absolutely a role for the hyperscalers. It's understanding which of your applications, which of your workloads suits those venues and making some very conscious decisions. So no longer is it binary as it was in the past. It's far more of a graduated or a continuum-based approach. And I think that for me gives clients better choice, and I think there will be less mistakes made because you can now choose a more appropriate venue.
Sumeeth, are you seeing a similar trend to what Jeff's been talking about? Because the reality is a lot of people have made a lot of mistakes, costly mistakes. But what are the trends that you're seeing in the migration towards cloud?
So and to Jeff's point regarding cloud being in its infancy, cloud is complex. Let me not try and water it down and say it's an easy IT adoption strategy. And speaking to most other CIOs, every organization is on some level of cloud adoption or cloud maturity. Where the complexity really gets baked in, and I think this is where we need to be cognizant of the fact that a lot of companies and entities still have the monolithic legacy type applications that are still running, right? So on the one hand, and this is the juggling act really for CIOs, is on the one hand, I've got my current legacy monolithic 3-tier system of record type applications, which the business is built on and the business is currently running on. And then on the one hand, there's this need for digital transformation, rolling out new applications, and accelerating that transformation journey.
Yes.
The rub comes in is that these two need to talk. The new stuff still needs to speak to the old stuff. So the old stuff or the current stuff still needs a place to run efficiently, effectively, with predictable performance, security, compliance, whilst you do the development on the other side. So the cloud conversation is really becoming a fit for purpose type conversation. And to Jeff's earlier point, the hyperscalers have a place and there's certain workloads that are aptly suited to run there. But private cloud and dedicated cloud as a service also still has a space once you transition into that digital era.
Gents, what is the one thing that has surprised you with what you do in your backgrounds and your cloud specialists and all the stuff that you do? And you've been in this business for a long time. Many people have seen many surprises into how people have adapted and the kinds of things that people are doing in the cloud. And is there anything that stands out that has really surprised you since this pandemic has broken in 2020?
I suppose for me, one of the surprises is the shift between CapEx in building on-premise infrastructure to consumption and clients being far more open to looking at as a service model. So the one thing that the cloud has done on demand, pay as you grow, has really got people used to the idea of you pay for what you consume, and that's become something that's for them the way they want to do more. So now when I have a look at talking to clients about building infrastructure on premise, whilst they may want it in their data center, they'd like to consume it in the cloud like that fashion.
Okay.
So we've really seen quite a big shift on how people want to consume infrastructure and how they want it delivered. They don't necessarily want to run it, to Sumeeth's point earlier. You want to worry about innovating your business, not necessarily operating infrastructure. So if they can get it consumptive, if they can get it delivered as a managed service, that is one of the big changes that I've seen in the pandemic.
That's very, very interesting. What are you seeing, Sumeeth? What are your customers telling you?
So very, very similar to what Jeff touched on, and it's more about IT now driving business outcomes. So IT was always seen traditionally as the server room at the bottom, and it's a liability to business.
Yes.
IT now has a seat at the round table where it's about driving business outcomes. CIOs have now had to change their approach, and you would have seen some of the titles change. We now have CDOs and Chief Digital Officers, and we have CTOs. So it's really expanding that need for IT to come to the front. And as Jeff touched on, the need for this consumptive way of consuming IT versus the traditional way of setting up infrastructure, managing it, maintaining it.
Yeah.
One thing that's been very interesting, Aki, is cloud gives a way of consuming IT. However, the hygienes around it still remain the same.
Yes.
So it hasn't fundamentally changed in that somebody still needs to manage this. Somebody still needs to maintain this. And this is where a cloud service provider steps in to say, I'll manage this entire stack. You worry about business transformation and business innovation. Leave IT to me as a trusted advisor, and I'll guide you through this journey from a cloud adoption perspective.
Fantastic. Sumeeth Singh, Cloud Provider Manager for Sub-Saharan Africa at VMware. Jeff Jack, who's the Principal Practice Head for Cloud at Dimension Data. Gents, great discussion, and I think what you're both highlighting is that it's not if you're going to make the journey, you have to make the journey, because ultimately this is what's making companies more competitive. Adding the flexibility and the agility of the cloud is what's differentiating you as an organization. I'm talking about the companies along that process. And we've seen this over the lockdown and throughout the pandemic, that companies who haven't had that same adoption have been left lagging behind. Fantastic discussion. Thank you so much for joining us. That's our first episode of Cloudy with a Chance of VMware. Hope you've enjoyed it.